What's up? What's good? We are back on the channel today with another banger. In this video, I'll be doing a tier ranking of all of the Weeknd's albums, just in anticipation of his new album release. I'm a huge Weeknd fan, if you guys don't already know. Love Abel, and I'm really excited for his new album. And just as a kind of way to celebrate that, I'm going to be doing a tier ranking of all his previous albums. So, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, let's start things off with his first mixtape slash album, House of Balloons. This is honestly one of my favorite Abel projects ever. Really young Abel, a fresh Abel. He kind of innovates this new type of sound. It's kind of like a dark R&B. And I guess he kind of does that throughout the whole like trilogy era with like House of Balloons, Thursday, and then like Echoes of Silence. But specifically in this album, that's essentially like the first real album where we get that dark R&B feel and vibe. And it's just a beautiful project. No skips for me. It's just straight R&B, just vibes and amazing vocals, great production. It's S tier, right? It's like, in my opinion, if without concept mattering, it's it's the Weeknd's best album, right? But obviously, there's not really much of a concept to it. But it is really unique and innovative in the genre. It kind of helped pioneer with like dark R&B. So as a result, I'll put it in the S tier. Same thing for Echoes of Silence. Another really great album. Similar, not a similar. It's not the same sound, but it's kind of a similar sound, right? And it's again amazing features, amazing vocals, and it's just overall, it was another great album. And I guess not really many features on that, but essentially like an amazing album in terms of what the Weeknd does by himself. Um, and then we get a Thursday, which is essentially the last part of the trilogy. I guess it's between both of them, but Thursday, in my opinion, it's still a really solid album. It's a B tier. It's not quite as good as Echoes of Silence and House of Balloons because they both have just so many bangers, but it's still a really solid album. Has some really great hits on it, and it's just a very enjoyable experience. But just it's not like as good as these two albums, so I can't really say it's S tier. But I also won't say it's like any of these. It's still a great album, right? So B tier I think is perfect. Then we get to Kissland. Kissland is honestly one of Weeknd's like best albums. It's very overlooked in terms of that like ranking and whatever it is, right? It's just that I don't think it's S tier, but it's like really good. So I'll put it in the A tier. It's just right below, just like a spot below where like these albums are at, in my opinion. Now we go to Beauty Behind the Madness, which was essentially the Weeknd's like first, I think, pop heavy album, and this is the album that really took off and like kind of like cemented the Weeknd as like a global superstar, because like he released this album, became really famous. There's so many like bangers off this album, a lot of hot singles off this, not singles, but like essentially a lot of like charting songs off this album, such as The Hills, Earned It, things like that. So it's a really great album. It's a very pop-y Weeknd vibe. A new experience compared to like previous albums. He kind of does that on Kissland, but not as much as on Beauty Behind the Madness. But it's still a great album. Really cool to see the Weeknd like begin to like evolve as an artist, and as a result, I think I'll put it also in the A tier. Another really great album. It's just not as good as these two albums up here. Now we get to My Dear Melancholy. It's a short album, but it's sweet. And my biggest issue is that it's really short. That's the only issue. If this album was like, I don't know, like taken from like 5 or 6 songs and taken in I guess expanded upon, right? And put into a like 10 or 12 sorry, 10 or 12 track album, right? I think this album would definitely be like S tier. It's just the fact that it's so short. I can't really like put it like S tier when these projects are all like a lot longer, and as a result have a higher chance to have like some skips, right? But yeah, it's a great project, no skips. Really cool kind of fusion between like older Weeknd and the poppy newer Weeknd. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But actually, I don't know if I can put it in A tier because it's so short. I'll put it in B tier. It's a great album. It's just that since it's so short, I just can't put it with like these albums, you know? Now we get to Starboy. Starboy is an absolute banger. Um, Amazing project. Is one of my favorite pop albums of the 2010s and maybe even ever. It just has banger after banger after banger. The only issue I think is it's a little bit too long for my liking, so I think that's why I'll put in the A tier because it's a great album. It's just not there in terms of like completely being like cohesive as an album piece, right? Like it's just there's a couple skips, which again I understand. There's a lot of songs, so it makes sense. There's gonna be a couple skips, but still a fantastic album, you know. Now we get to After Hours and Dawn FM, the two parts of his newest and final trilogy. After Hours is a classic, right? Like it's automatically S tier. It just has to be S tier, you know. After Hours was like honestly like one of the biggest albums of the Weeknd's career, or still is one of the biggest albums of his career. It was a smash hit on the charts. A lot of really high placed singles, not singles, but singles, but songs on like the charts and stuff on the Billboard, things like that. But even taking commercial success out of it, I thoroughly enjoy this album as like a cohesive piece, right? And there's also a cool concept behind it in that like it's essentially about the Weeknd living like not troubled, but more so like a superstar lifestyle in LA, and then eventually just dying in that album. And his death in the album like culminates with I think like Final Lullaby, that being like his like last breath or whatever. And the Weeknd then transitions from his death in After Hours to Dawn FM, which I'll get to. But yeah, sonically, it's really great. I love the sound on After Hours. A lot of hits, a lot of bangers, very few skips. I think I only had like one skip on the album, and that was from like the deluxe edition. But from the regular edition, no skips. Absolute classic. And honestly, like Starboy was amazing, but After Hours just takes it up a whole another level, right? And obviously a different sound compared to Starboy, which again, that's what I love about The Weeknd is that he's really good at like creating new sounds and evolving as an artist as compared to just like staying in one lane, just like stagnating, you know, and just like making the same music over and over again. So again, another thing I love about The Weeknd. Now we get to, in my opinion, The Weeknd's best album ever, Dawn FM. And I think it's his best album ever just because of like how cool the concept is, you know? Obviously, these are albums are all amazing, like even these ones here. It's just, I think this sounds great, has a really cool sound to it. Still, it's different from After Hours, you know, in terms of its sound. So he still evolves from there. It also has a lot of bangers, no skips, and it's just straight after straight hit. But the thing that separates Dawn FM from his previous albums to me is that he has a really unique concept. So remember I talked about how like in After Hours the Weeknd dies. In a Dawn FM, he's essentially like in this like purgatory state, right? Where he's just looking back on his past and he's being shown his like past memories by this guy that essentially like narrates this like Dawn FM radio, and that's gonna be Jim Carrey, right? So essentially, this Dawn FM radio is kind of showing the Weeknd his like past life and his like regrets, his issues, things like that, and it shows like how he's been such a horrible like person to the people he's loved, the woman he's loved, and how he's like essentially not being able to find like a stable or permanent relationship, and the reason that happens is kind of like explained or like kind of like hinted at in A Tale by Quincy, and it's about how like similar to the famous producer Quincy Jones, The Weeknd didn't have his father. Well, obviously Quincy Jones didn't have his mother, but either way, not having a parent in his life during his like childhood and to like help him grow up and be a better person, kind of took away the possibility of that parent from like teaching him, his specifically his dad, from teaching him how to like be a better person in his relationships and his love life, things like that. So as a result, either consciously or unconsciously, he always pushed away the woman that loved him and the woman he loved, out of fear, out of just like not wanting to be like heartbroken, and just obviously again some unconscious factors, right? So that kind of explains like why he's going through this like cyclic process in the album of like essentially finding a girl, falling in love, but then like either being toxic to her, cheating on her, or like just not being a great lover back, right? And eventually culminates with him finally accepting the fact that he was never like the best person, and in Less Than Zero, right? This is where he accepts that, and he's like, I'll always be less than zero, and he's kind of admitting that like he was never the greatest person, and he still has regrets over that. And then you have like Phantom Regret by Jim Carrey at the end, which is the closing track to the album, not counting the deluxe, of course. Um, and Jim Carrey kind of just talks about how, like, again, you have to kind of give up your regrets. And it just shows how Abel finally is giving up his regrets after the end of, like, I'll always be less than zero, right? Where he's kind of starting to give it up. And then now he's realized that, like, he has to give up his regrets and realize that, like, yes, he wasn't the greatest of people, but he should like not feel regretful over all of his past actions, and more so just embrace the fact that like he's matured and realized that he isn't the same person now looking back at his life that he was when he like died, or even when he like was going through his life, right? So it's a really cool concept, right? And it kind of ties into his future album, I think, Hurry Up Tomorrow, because I think what's going to happen is like he's going to die in, he already died, right? After Hours. This was like his purgatory state in Dawn FM, and now he's going to try and go through like maybe the afterlife or like a rebirth or something in Hurry Up Tomorrow. And it also kind of ties into it like name wise, right? After Hours is like late at night, right? Dawn FM is the crack of dawn, it's like early morning. Hurry Up Tomorrow is kind of talking about how like tomorrow is coming. So I don't know. I just think Dawn FM having such a cool and unique concept, especially for like a pop album, pop slash R&B obviously, but especially for a pop album, is like really, really cool. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is just my tier ranking. So I got like four songs in the S tier. Four albums in the S tier. Honestly, maybe too many, but I just feel like it's hard for like me to put them any lower because all of them are banger albums. The Weeknd has very few misses of an albums. He has like no misses of albums, actually, in all honesty, right? Like I really thoroughly enjoy all these albums and listen to them all the time. It's just comparing them to one another, it's kind of hard to like put these two against like these four or these three against these four, right? That's my tier ranking. Let me know down below what you guys think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you also a Weeknd fan? Are you excited for the new album? Whatever it is, just put it down below. And until next time.